All right, YouTube. Hey, something here I just noticed on my old 281 XP that will be an issue on any future 281 and 288 XP builds or rebuilds that I do. So I had replaced this, the original Tillotson OEM carburetor with a OEM Walbro. And I think both of those carburetors have their pros and cons. And so for the most part, they're probably equal, I guess. And I won't go into those. But one thing I've noticed with the new Walbro carburetor is that you'll notice here that, and this never really happened, but the concave end of the throttle never really met up perfectly with the little round actuator there on the throttle. Also, if I get you underneath here, you might notice as I actuate the carburetor trigger that the flange, the little tab, comes up against the bottom of the throttle arm, and it thereby prevents full throttle. Could be a problem I always had and didn't know it. And if you look in from the top, as I back in here is a little tab right there. It's a plastic tab. That is actually the throttle stop. This is not the throttle stop, it's just a tab. And that tab is part of your idle adjustment. And if I bring you in from the back, you can notice as I actuate the trigger where that tab comes up against the bottom of the plastic throttle arm. Now, if I were to bend that tab back in here, I could do some damage. I also might find it more difficult to adjust the idle with the set screw here, because it very well could bottom out. It's already in there pretty tight as it is to get it set to its correct idle. So the option would be to potentially heat up this arm to bend it out this way a little bit so that it clears that tab when it comes up. The other option would be to simply grind, put some markings on that arm, and to grind the bottom side of that throttle arm. It doesn't require much, so I don't think it's really going to compromise the integrity all that much. And I think that would be better than grinding the tab as opposed to bending the tab. And then, but another thing that I noticed is that the end of the throttle, if I were to align this and view straight down the partition of the car box after the cover gets put on, is that the tip of the throttle arm is actually coming up against that. So another thing that may have been preventing full throttle in the past. So what I'm going to do to circumvent these problems is I'm going to round off this tip right here, and then instead of heating up and bending this, I'm going to mark and grind off just the amount of plastic necessary so that that tab will fit up in and clear it, so that I can get this throttle completely engaged like that. Right now, as you can see, it's not going down. It's not fully engaging. So I have a little bit more throttle I could get out of this to optimize the saw. So just something that you should be aware of. And if I'm able to successfully complete those tasks, I will grab another video showing how it works. The other thing I should mention is I'm going to need to widen this so that it comes down on this portion of the carburetor throttle and can fully engage it. Because even after making those other changes, you can see how I'm still going to need a little bit more thickness there. So one of the options would be to wrap it with something like some tape, but I really don't like that. So I think what I'm going to do is take 1 or 2 shrink tubing on the end there and shrink tube that, and that should give me more than enough added thickness so that I can take full advantage of the operating range that the carburetor is designed for. Back at you. All right, let's see what we did here. So I've shaved off that point right there and a little bit of a tab right there. Let's see if we can zoom in a little better. All right, so now you can see that that tab is going to clear, but I still can't get full throttle, and that's because I still have to add some depth or some thickness to this part of the throttle arm so that I can get the throttle all the way to the throttle stop, so that you can see where that idle screw tab is. It needs to basically be horizontal to be at full throttle, and I can't quite get there. I've got the throttle completely depressed. So there's a combination of an issue of how the end of the throttle was designed, as well as you know, at full depression I can't achieve what I need to achieve there. So we're gonna, and this is an OEM design error that we've discovered. I'm assuming others were aware of this, but one more alteration by putting some shrink tubing, I think, around the tip of that, and we'll check back, see if we're able to get this throttle fully depressed. All right, so I didn't have enough shrink tubing. I may still put some shrink tubing over there. I'm not sure. I ended up using gaffer's tape to build up the end of that throttle linkage or throttle arm. And now you can see that the tab, the idle set tab, it's horizontal like it should be. And it's pretty hard to show here, but the end of the throttle comes right up against the throttle stop like it's supposed to. So just beware if you're rebuilding a 281 or a 288 that you're going to have to somehow beef up the end of that throttle arm so that you can obtain full throttle. It's not a huge difference, but I'll bet you it'd be a few hundred, maybe 500 RPMs worth potentially, and you'll be able to more accurately tune the saw. Otherwise, to get the RPMs out of it at a lower throttle would probably result in running the saw too lean, which is bad. So till next time. All right, some finality here with our little modification that we made on the throttle lever or throttle arm. I ended up leaving the gaffer's tape, which provided as kind of a spacer, and then you can see I've covered that finally with some shrink tubing. Oh, we're getting full throttle, and the tip of the shrink tubing is not meeting where the carb box partition will be located. So now we have a much more durable setup that's not going to come off and wear out as easily, nor wear on the carb sleeve on the flange. So we've solved our problem with this old 281, and no need to take apart the handle and tank assembly to replace the lever, and that still would have required some modification. These new carbs, just even though they're OEM, they're just not designed to account for the lack of full throttle that you get. So that's just if you do these 281, 288s, you're gonna have to consider whether or not you want full throttle, and if so, make this modification. So cheers.